I am super excited because it only took like 38 million years, but the remix frame, the frame that I have been working on, is finally here, and I decided to make this video for you guys because I know there's a lot of questions. So that's what this video is here for, to answer those questions. The remix, why? Because I used to DJ, and back in the DJing days, you took bits and pieces of certain things, you'd mash them up together, and you created what's called a remix, and that is essentially what I have done here. So now I have been doing this for a little over 3 years, and so I took bits and pieces out of every single one of those frames and put it all together. This frame is made for freestyle, it is made for acro, it is made for doing all the fun, crazy, flippity floppy stuff that a lot of you people out there like to do, which means there's a little bit of a different design brief from, say, a race frame. The number one thing was center of mass, and I got that from the Vortex. Now, some of you may know I had a little bit to do with the Vortex 250 Pro from back in the day, and that was one of my favorite frames because it flew so nicely, and it was because of where the battery in GoPro was relative to the prop line. It was basically centered, and so I wanted to take that concept and combine it with everything else that I liked into a frame, and voila, you've got the remix. And so that's the whole goal of this frame design, was I wanted something where you've got the battery, GoPro centralized to the prop line, so that way you've got the absolute most neutral flight characters. So what does that mean? Well, your flight controller doesn't have to work as hard, and your power system doesn't have to work as hard, because now it's just rotating into itself instead of around an object that is off axis. This is a true X design, again, because the design goal is to make something very neutral. So that translates into a much easier tuning process. You normally build a quad, and when you go to the PID tuning portion of this, you got a window from which the quad is flyable. On this frame, because everything is so neutral, the PID tuning window is actually much bigger, which means now you can actually tune for feel instead of tuning to just make sure that the quad is staying stable and doing what you want it to do. So the second important thing that I wanted to go after with this frame design was component protection. You're probably flying bando, and if you crash, if your camera is not protected or if it's exposed, then you're probably gonna mess something up. So I wanted to make sure that every component that goes into a mini quad is well protected. So let's focus in right here at the very front. This is the cage for the FPV camera. What type of camera does it take? Well, it uses a full-size camera, and as long as you got one of those cameras that got one of these backing right here, it drops right in, and it actually takes advantage of that, which gives you now 20 to 60 degrees of camera tilt adjustment. Moving on to electrical component protection, everything goes underneath this undercarriage or this bottom hatch. If you take a look at these arms, you can see that they've got extended paws, and I took this design, borrowed it from the Floss, because this has proven to be the most effective as far as protecting your motors in the middle of a crash. As you can see, you've got a lot of range first of what it's going to hit first depending on where you're at. Now remember, keep in mind you got props on, so the prop is just, yeah, this might break, but then you're going to hit this next. We are introducing a couple of points of impact before your actual motor gets hit. And that to me was very important, because when you're flying freestyle, you want to protect everything. So a couple of people have been asking, what are these little grooves here? So here's an example. So it's just a little guide so that you can run the motor wires underneath and keep everything looking nice and clean as it goes into this underslung flight controller stack. While we're talking about components, I personally like to run a 4-in-1 where all of the ESCs are on one board, but you don't have to. You can actually run individual ESCs, and what you'd just do then is you'd mount the ESCs on the arms underneath right here, run a zip tie, whatever you feel like is necessary for you to secure the ESCs, and you're golden. Now, as a freestyler, that means, you know, I'm probably crashing a lot, which means I'm probably working on this thing a lot. So I wanted this to be very easy to work on. Ease of use. Let's start off with the tool that you use, right? Most frames out there right now, probably requires you a couple of tools. This frame, you just need one, an M2 hex head. This one tool will allow you to assemble the entire thing without any additional tools. And on top of that, when you're going to build this frame, it's a little bit different in the sense that you build the frame and put it together first, and then you put your electrical components afterwards. It makes the whole thing a lot easier. Say you've got the frame built, you're gonna either work on it, you take out these two screws, then what you do is you flip this over onto its side, and as you can see here, it actually presents it to you at a nice little angle. You lift this hatch up, and now you've got access to all of your electrical components underneath here. As you can see, you got the holes for your flight controller stack. Up top, there are some pass-through holes so that you can go ahead and access those screws. Right here, you've got two little slots to run a zip tie, because this is where I run my VTX. This little slot right here on the production version is actually going to be a little bit shrunken up because nobody runs a receiver this big anymore. But there's a little slot here for you to mount your receiver, and it also includes this little X plate. You don't have to use this. You run it underneath here, right? And then now it gives you a spot to run it. I personally don't use it, but I know some people would appreciate something like that. So it's there for you. And then you've got these slots right here, and this is where I mount my antennas. So these are zip tie holes to secure your VTX and or receiver antenna. Close this hatch back up, and then you put these two screws back on, and you are ready to rock and roll again. Let's say you need to swap out your arm. This is how simple it is. Take out this outer screw, loosen up this one, and it's off. Take your U motor arm, slide it back in, and you're good to go. Now, the one thing I want to point out while we got this open is you can see here, it is milled, so that it creates this little pocket action, so that when this goes in, it's actually supported by additional carbon in addition to these two bolts. Creates this nice little unibody for extra rigidity. And you know, when you're just sliding motor arms back in and out, it just makes it a lot easier because it creates this pocket. It doesn't have to move. You don't need 5 different arms to do it. In fact, that's one of the other things that I like about this frame is that none of the hardware is shared with the flight controller. That's probably like my biggest pet peeve, is when a frame is designed where structurally it shares the same hardware or bolts as a flight controller, because then when you have to remove an arm with that, you gotta mess with the flight controller and it just turns into this big old thing, and I don't want to deal with that. And so this frame, not a problem. Very simple for you guys to work on because I emphasize stick time. Specifications. All right, so this uses biaxial carbon, but we wanted to make sure that we took the time to orient the fiber on the carbon to take best advantage of the strength. Every single piece, we've specifically laid out the carbon orientation in a specific way. Most like other premium frames out there, the carbon on this frame is chamfered as well, but it's not just chamfered for looks. It's actually chamfered in areas where it's most important, such as where the motor wire goes. That is probably the biggest reason why motor wires get chopped, and for lipo straps. This is where your lipo straps go, as well as here if you're gonna mount it sideways. And the reason why most people actually break lipo straps is because that leading edge of that carbon is very sharp. You'll actually tear up that lipo strap, and that's where you have a failure. Motor to motor distance, 250 millimeters. Weight, carbon only, 86 grams. If you want to include this session bar, or the session solution mount, that's going to be an additional 5 grams. And then the hardware itself, which is a combination of aluminum washers and titanium screws, we're looking at 16 grams, bringing your total weight up to about 108, 109 grams, depending on what you are going to run and not run. So if you know me, I am like the king of losing my GoPro. My GoPro just gets ejected. With this frame, it's got this nice, specially formulated gel, which will actually absorb vibrations, which means less chances of jello coming up in your footage. And then you secure it with a strap. There's adjustability here, so if you move it farther forward, you'll actually get less props in view. The farther back, the better the center of mass deal is, but then you're also gonna get a little bit more of the props in view. So it's up to you on what you prefer. With it like this, I can confidently say that in all of the crashes that I have had, I have yet to lose a GoPro. I have not ejected a GoPro, even though the craziest crashes that I've had with this, a lot of that is just because of this little gel pad. That same material is over here. This is my custom formulated battery pad. This is the quad upside down. This is me shaking it, and it's not gonna go nowhere. So use this battery pad along with a good quality lipo strap, and you'll be fine. A lot of people are like, how do you mount the battery on that thing? Like, they've seen it mounted sideways. They're asking, does it have to be that way? The answer is no. This frame was designed to run the battery sideways, and when you run the battery like this, in my opinion, you really take advantage of that whole idea of bringing that centralized mass together. Now, when you mount the battery this way, all you do is you want to use a thicker strap, and you run that through this slot, and you bring it back out through this side. And again, when you use this special pad, and you use a nice quality lipo strap, you should never ever have any issues. So for the people that want to mount your battery like this, you're gonna wanna run a battery strap through here. As you can see, you don't even have to take anything off. You can just slide it right through. And then you're gonna run one more in the back just for that added safety measure. You'll also notice this nice little contraption right here. That is a custom lipo catch. This is kind of the area where the props are swinging. I just wanted to make sure that there's nothing dangling. Normally, your lipo pigtail is connected to your flight controller or a PDB. And in a crazy enough crash, I wanted to create some type of relief so that you're not yanking on the actual PDB or flight controller itself. And so that is why that is there. And the one thing I want to point out with this is it doesn't have to be in this particular position. In fact, this is universal. You can take it out, flip it, put on this side. You can even put on this corner, this corner. Either way, up to you. It just depends on what your preference is and how your particular build goes. In fact, I've even had one guy not run this at all and actually just run the lipo pigtail back here and pop up from the back. You guys take your pick on what's best for you. One of the other things that I want to think about was just the whole aftermarket aspect of things, right? So if you don't want to run the session mount, no problem. You can actually take that entire thing off. The whole thing is still structurally sound. And now you've got 1, 2, and now this third hole there for people who are making aftermarket accessories. So let's say you wanted to create a 3D printed session mount that actually had like no props and views. You've got these accessory holes that you can take advantage of. Another thing I want to point out is back here, there is this back plate that's just blank. Right now, that's just there for you to use however you want to see fit. If you want to drill a hole and make your antennas come out there, you can. Or you could just use this to put a sticker over. Or at some point in the future, we could even put an LED on it, which we did on, just for you to do whatever you want to do with it. It's really more of an expansion and kind of more of a future type deal. Here's an example of what we did with one of them. We actually put an LED strip on there, and when this thing opens, the whole slatch opens with it.
The slatch?
This hatch opens with it. So another question that I've had is, what is the biggest size battery that you can run on here? I have found it to be this. So this is a 4S 2200 milliamp pack, and if you run this thing sideways, you will not have any issues with the props coming in. You're not limited. All right, so let's just get into why, like just the whole reason why of like a lot of things. So, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, this seems to be like a little bit on the heavier side. I actually like a little bit of heft to a freestyle quad because that lets me chuck the quad like over a tree or a building and just really makes a lot of freestyle moves a lot easier instead of just kind of falling after you cut the throttle. On top of that, I also run 5S now. I kind of get the best of both worlds. So I've got the weight, but I've also got the power to make it really go to where I want it to go. So I hope you guys like the frame. Hopefully it kind of helps you understand kind of my head and where I was at with this whole thing when I was trying to design it. Let me know what you guys think. If you can, fly it on 5S even. Check out the description in the links if you guys want to find out where to find this. Peace out, guys. I'll see you later. All axes are happy because no one axis is more favored than the other. It's kind of like having brothers and sisters, I guess, and making, I don't know where I'm going with that. Delete that.